I have told the story of Vethara's founding to 100 councils. I have recited the names of every Alpha King before me, their wars, their treaties, their deaths, without faltering once. I am a man who remembers. It is the bitterest irony of my life that for 9 years I looked at Saren Asheville every single day and did not truly see her. Let me tell you how a king can be an utter fool. She came to Vethara's keep the autumn I turned 30. I had just buried my father, inherited the crown before I was ready, and my council was already circling me with marriage proposals like wolves around fresh meat. Saren arrived not as a candidate, she arrived as a solution to a different problem. My archive had been in chaos since our old record keeper, Holt, had died with half the keep's land deeds unfinished and the other half misfiled. Someone had heard of a young woman in the Valley Holds who had trained under a border-order physician and then taught herself the old archival methods out of sheer stubbornness. My steward brought her before me on a gray Tuesday afternoon. She stood in the middle of my great hall, which still smelled of funeral candles, and looked around at the stacked ledgers and the mold-spotted maps pinned crookedly to the stone walls, and she said, without greeting, without preamble, "How long has this been like this?" 3 years, I said. "I'll need 6 months, she said, and a boy to carry the heavy crates." I hired her. I told myself it was purely practical. In some ways it was. Saren Asheville was not what my council meant when they talked about eligible women. She had no pack bond, no designation, no family with territory to offer. She was the daughter of a Valley Hold physician who had died young and left her nothing but a box of medicinal texts and the habit of reading them. She was not, as Lord Keed pointedly reminded me at my first winter council, a political asset. But she fixed my archive in 4 months, not 6. And then, because she had also been trained as a healer, she stayed for my wounded, the patrol guards who came back from the border crossings with ice burns and badly set brakes, the packmates who couldn't afford the valley physicians. She stayed because there was always something useful she could do, and because Vethara's keep had, as she told me once without any particular self-pity, better light for reading than anywhere else she'd lived. She stayed. That is the simple truth of it. She simply stayed and I let her, because she made the keep run better and asked for almost nothing, and I was always busy with things that felt more urgent. That is what I tell myself now when I am being honest about the lesser parts of my nature. The fuller truth is more shameful. I liked having her there. I liked coming into the council room at the end of a long day and finding her cross-legged on the window bench with a dispatch she had already read, already annotated in her small, neat hand, ready to tell me the 3 things I actually needed to know rather than the 14 things the sender wanted me to care about. I liked that she never lowered her eyes to be deferential and never raised them to be challenging. She simply met me level, as an equal meeting an equal, which was not something I got from many people in a keep that orbited my crown. I liked that when she disagreed with me she said so plainly, and when she agreed with me she didn't perform enthusiasm. I liked her silences, which were not empty. I liked the ink that was always on her left hand, the 3rd and 4th fingers from where she gripped the pen. I liked the way she moved through the keep at night, lamp in hand, unhurried, as if she had always belonged to its corridors. I liked all of it, and I called it comfortable. I told myself that what I felt for her was the easy warmth of an employer for a valued member of his household, a convenience raised to fondness. My wolf knew better. My wolf had known from almost the beginning some low, certain hum beneath every conversation, some pull that followed her out of rooms. I told myself that was familiarity. I managed, through 9 years of studied inattention, to not look directly at what it actually was. 9 years, I am still ashamed of how long it took. And I am still ashamed of what it took to make me see. Her name was Myra Solvin, and she arrived in the 3rd week of the 9th autumn, in a carriage with silver wheel fittings and the Solvin crest on the door. She was 26, which was younger than Saren by nearly a decade. She was beautiful in the way that is immediately legible to a crowded hall: dark hair, high color, a laugh that carried across stone rooms. The Solvan pack held the eastern passes, which Vethara needed, and the Solvan lord had made it abundantly clear that the price of a continued alliance was a formal bond between our bloodlines. My council had been building toward this for 2 years. I had put them off for 2 years. I had, if I am being honest now, put them off because some part of me was not ready, and that part could not entirely explain why. But I was 39, and I was a king, and the eastern passes mattered, and Myra Solvan was exactly what a politically rational alpha king should want. I agreed to the courtship. By the end of the 3rd week, I had agreed to the betrothal. I remember the night I announced it to the hall. I was standing at the head of the long table, and I was watching the faces of my council light up with relief, and somewhere in the middle of that, I looked across the room, not looking for anything, not with intention, and I found Saren. She was standing near the archive door, the way she always stood at evening meals, slightly apart from the feast proper, a cup she rarely drank from in her hands, listening to everything. She was looking at me. Not with devastation, not with tears, nothing so legible as that. She was looking at me with an expression I had never seen on her face before, and it took me a long moment to name it, and by the time I had named it she had looked away and the expression was gone. It was grief. The composed, private grief of someone who has finally received confirmation of something they had long suspected but had not wanted to believe. I told myself I had misread it. A king in the middle of his own betrothal announcement tells himself many comfortable lies. I turned back to my council and accepted their congratulations, and I did not let myself think about what I had seen, because thinking about it would have required me to also think about what it meant, and I was not yet ready to do that. Saren was at breakfast the next morning, ink already on her fingers, a border report open in front of her. She said good morning in precisely the tone she always used. She asked me 2 questions about the North Patrol schedule that needed answers and wrote down my responses in her small, neat hand. She was exactly the same as she had always been. And I, because I was a fool, because I was afraid of what I might find if I looked, because taking the comfortable thing apart meant admitting that I had built the comfortable thing wrong. I was exactly the same as I had always been. The betrothal period was 2 months. Custom required it. The bond sealing rite, the formal ceremony that would tie Myra Solvan's wolf blood to mine, could not be rushed. I spent those 2 months learning Myra, who was interesting and spirited and entirely pleasant to spend time with, and trying not to notice the small wrongness that gathered in my chest every time I sat across from her at the long table and found myself, without meaning to, tallying the ways she was not Saren. I noticed the ways she spoke over people, rather than waiting to hear them out. I noticed that she processed information loudly, thinking through problems in real time in the middle of councils, which was not wrong exactly, only different from the way I had become accustomed to having problems processed. I noticed that she touched things with great confidence and immediacy, and that the physical space of a room rearranged itself around her, which Saren had never done. Saren had always arranged herself around a room. I noticed all of this and I said nothing. I was going to marry this woman. My East passes depended on it. My council had collectively exhaled for the first time in 2 years. I kept my silence and I kept my course. Saren did not change. She briefed me every morning. She tended the patrol wounds every evening. She ran the archive with the same quiet efficiency. She was at every council session and said what needed to be said and nothing more. If she was in pain, and I believe now that she was, that the 2 months of the betrothal period were among the harder ones of her life, she gave me nothing to read it from, which was, I understood later, a kind of gift. She was protecting me from the knowledge that would have required me to act on it. She was giving me the clean version of the thing, because she had decided it was not her place to complicate my path. That was Saren's particular way of loving, quietly, without demand, making herself small enough that the people she cared for never felt the full weight of her. It had taken me 9 years not to understand what that meant. It took me losing her to understand it completely. The bond sealing rite was held in the Great Hall on the first moonlit night of the new season. Half the pack was assembled. The Solvan lord and his household had arrived the day before. My council stood in their formal positions along the walls. Myra was in silver, which suited her. I stood at the center of the hall in the traditional position, which is to say with your arms at your sides and your wolf as close to the surface as you can bring it, so that the bond work has something to take hold of. The rite keeper was an old woman from the high territories, who had officiated 30 bond sealings in her life, and whose hands had not shaken once. She began the working with the bone cup and the blood mark on the back of each hand and the old tongue words that don't translate neatly but mean, approximately, what is fated, let it be known. I felt the working engage. There is a sensation to a bond sealing rite, a pull, a gathering, something that moves from the center of the chest outward. I had expected it. I had been told what it would feel like. I stood still and waited for it to settle. It did not settle. What happened instead was something I had no reference for and no words to accurately describe, except to say that it felt like a door opening in the wrong wall. The working engaged and then, in the same instant, or close enough that I could not separate them, something tore. Not inside me, somewhere adjacent to me. Somewhere that felt, with a sudden and violent certainty, like it was trying to reach me across a distance it had never before been permitted to cross. The rite keeper stopped speaking. Myra Solvan took a sharp step backward, her hand going to her chest. The wrongness she felt was not mine. She felt the working failing, the bond it was meant to build collapsing before it could take root, because what it met in me was not empty space waiting to be filled. What it met in me was already occupied. Had been occupied, I understood in that one catastrophic moment, for 9 years. The seal broke. I didn't know then that there was a seal. I didn't know her bloodline had carried one, a generation-old lock on a bond that had been present from the beginning and had been suppressed, deliberately, by an ancestor's working she had never known about and I had never had reason to investigate. I learned all of that later, from the rite keeper's pale and shaking explanation. What I knew in the moment, what I knew with a clarity that felt like being stripped of everything I had carefully constructed, was this. The mate mark burned to life on my left wrist, not the ceremonial mark the rite had been working toward, the true one, the one that is not made but revealed. It did not burn toward Myra Solvan. I looked up from my wrist, from the mark that was still forming, still spreading, lines of silver gold tracing up toward my forearm, and I looked across the hall, and I found Saren standing in the archive doorway. She was there the way she was always there, slightly apart, witness to the thing rather than participant in it, holding a report she had meant to give me before the rite began and had not yet had the chance. She was looking at her own left wrist. The mark was on her too. I could see it from across the hall, the same lines, the same silver gold, the same pattern mirrored. She looked up from her wrist, and she looked across the hall and she found me. I do not know what my face was doing. I know what I felt. The floor shifting, 9 years reorganizing themselves in the space of 3 seconds, every conversation and every silence and every moment I had written off as comfortable and convenient revealing itself suddenly as something else entirely, something I had been standing in the middle of for the better part of a decade without the eyes to see it. My wolf moved, not toward Myra Solvan, who was 3 feet from me in silver silk, toward the archive doorway. My wolf, which had never in my adult life done anything without my direction, dropped to its belly on the stone floor of my great hall, in front of my entire assembled pack, in front of the Solvan delegation, in front of my council and my rite keeper and 40 wolves who were already shifting uncomfortably at the working gone wrong. A kneeling wolf does not have to be commanded. The pack wolves felt it before they understood it, the pull of a true bond acknowledgement, something older than custom or rank. And one by one, without order from me, without order from anyone, they folded. The hall went to its knees. Saren looked at the hall going to its knees. She looked at me. Then she turned and walked. I was not ready. That is my only defense, and it is not much of one. I stood in the center of my great hall with my pack kneeling around me and my bond mark burning on my wrist and my entire world rearranged, and I was not able to move fast enough. There was Myra Solvin to be spoken to, with the gentleness she deserved, because none of this was her doing. There was the Right Keeper to question. There was the Solvin Lord, whose anger I was going to have to manage before it became a political crisis. There were 40 wolves in my hall, who needed to understand what had just happened before the understanding curdled into something else. I dealt with all of it, quickly, because I had to, because a king cannot simply walk away from a collapsed bond ceiling in front of his full court and follow one woman out a door. I spoke to Myra first privately in the side chamber off the great hall. She was not devastated, she was composed in the way of someone who has processed shock into a cooler emotion, and she said, with a directness I had come to respect, I could feel it too. The working knew, I'm not angry. She was gracious about it. I was grateful for her graciousness, and I did not deserve it. The Solvin Lord took longer. The council took longer still. The Right Keeper walked me through the mechanics of a suppressed bloodline seal in the strained voice of someone who cannot believe she had not caught it in the preparatory readings, and I listened to all of it while one part of me was counting the minutes, and one part of me was replaying the expression on Saren's face in the moment before she turned. She had looked at the hall on its knees. She had looked at me, and what I had seen in the space of 1 second before she turned away was not triumph. It was not the vindication I might have expected, watching the man who had chosen another be publicly corrected by destiny itself. What I saw was something quieter and far more devastating. The expression of a woman who had already decided, who had made her peace with a different future, and who was not sure she wanted the thing that was being offered to her now, this late, in this way, at this cost. She had spent 9 years not asking for anything, and she had finally walked away. And now the universe was trying to hand her back what she had given up, and she was not certain she wanted it. That was what her face had said, in the second before she turned. I dealt with everything that had to be dealt with, and then I went to find her. She was not in the archive. She was not in the healer's room or on the East Gallery where she sometimes walked in the evenings. I checked the corridor outside her chamber door and found it closed, and when I knocked she did not answer, and when I tried the handle it was not locked, which meant she was not in there either, because Saren locked her door when she was inside and she slept lightly enough that a knock would have woken her. I found her in the stables, not with a horse, she was not riding out, not yet. She was sitting on the step outside the stable door in the dark, with her cloak over her shoulders and a small leather bag at her feet, and she was doing nothing. Not reading, not writing. Simply sitting with her hands in her lap and the cold air around her, which was the most unlike her of anything I had ever seen. Saren, I said. She looked up, her expression was composed. Of course it was. She had had years to practice the composure. My lord, she said. I had not been my lord to her in 7 years. Not since the second winter when she had told me, in her direct way, that she was not going to keep adding the honorific to every sentence when we were alone, and I had agreed because it had seemed reasonable, and because I liked, even then, the way she spoke to me without ceremony. My lord, she meant it as a wall, not a greeting. Where are you going? I asked. She looked at the bag, she looked back at me. South, she said. One of the valley holds. There's a physician there who has written to me twice about assisting with his practice. I should have gone 2 years ago. A beat. I'll send word about the archive. I've left detailed notes on the current dispatches. Whoever you bring in will need 6 weeks to. Stop, I said. She stopped. Not because I was her king. I could hear in the way she stopped that the king had nothing to do with it. She stopped because some part of her was still, even now, willing to hear me out. That was a greater mercy than I had any right to expect. I sat down on the step below her, which put me lower than her, looking up. I did not do it deliberately to make a point. I did it because it was where there was room to sit, and because I was tired of standing above things. I had stood above things for 39 years and looked down at the landscape and called the landscape ordinary, and I had been wrong about the most important part of it. There was a seal on your bloodline, I said. The right keeper explained it. Someone in your family's past 3 generations back, she thinks, maybe 4, had it placed. A suppression. It kept the bond from announcing itself the way it should have. Saren was quiet. I watched her process this, the way she always processed information, not aloud, not in real time, but in a rapid internal accounting that left almost nothing on her face. Why would someone seal a bond, she said, not defensively, with genuine scholarly interest which was so entirely her that my chest ached with it. The right keeper's best guess is protection, I said. The old holds sometimes sealed the bonds of daughters going into precarious situations, to keep a destined mate from being used as leverage. Your family was in the southern valleys when the border conflicts were bad. So she didn't know, Saren said, half to herself. Your mother, almost certainly not. It would have been her grandmother's decision or her grandmother's mother's. These seals are supposed to break after 2 generations. This one didn't. I paused. The bond sealing ceremony broke it. The working reaching for a different bond forced the true one to surface. Saren looked down at her left wrist. The mark was still there. I could see the lines faintly in the dark, silver pale against her skin. I looked at my own wrist. Still there too. These marks do not fade. 9 years, she said. 2 words. She said them quietly, without accusation, which was almost worse than accusation. 9 years, I said. Yes, I know. You didn't. She stopped, started again. You weren't wrong not to look elsewhere. You didn't know. I didn't know. There was nothing to see. She was being generous. I didn't deserve it. There was something to see, I said. I was looking somewhere else. The stable yard was quiet. The mist had come down off the higher ground the way it did in the cold months, and the stone walls were beaded with it, and somewhere in the south wing of the keep a door closed. Ordinary sounds. The ordinary sounds of my keep, in which Saren had been so present for so long that I had stopped noticing her the way you stop noticing the ground beneath your feet, not because it isn't there, but because you have stopped thinking about what it would mean if it weren't. The sovereign Lord, she said. Will be managed, I said. It is not your concern. You needed that alliance. I need a good deal of things, I said. Some of them I have been very stupid about. She looked at me for a long moment. Her face was doing that thing it sometimes did in councils when she was deciding whether what she was thinking was worth saying, a brief internal deliberation, a slight tension at the corners of her mouth. Usually she decided it was worth saying. It was one of the things I had always relied on. I held still and waited. I don't want to be the thing that gets handed to you because the other thing didn't work, she said. That's not, she pressed her lips together. I've been a practical solution for this keep for 9 years. I don't want to be a practical solution for you. You're not, I said. Aldrich, my name, not my title. She used my name the way she always had without making it into an event. You didn't choose me. You chose her. And then the ceremony broke, and suddenly here I am. How is that not me being the thing that's left when the other thing fails? It's not the same. Tell me why. I looked at my wrist. I looked at hers. Then I looked at her face, which was composed and tired and exactly as I had always known it, and I told her. I told her about the first winter, when she had come to me at 11 at night because she had found a calculation error in the Southern Trade Ledger that was going to cost Vethara a significant sum if I didn't correct it before the morning's dispatch, and she had apologized for disturbing me, and I had thought, even then, Even in that first year, I don't mind. I told her about the council session in the third year when she had disagreed with Lord Keith's position on the northern water rights so clearly, and so correctly that he had changed his position by the end of the afternoon, and I had thought, watching her, I have never seen anyone do that. I told her about the winter of the fourth year, when the border fever had come through the barracks, and she had slept in the healer's room for 16 days straight, and I had brought her supper myself on the fifth night because the page had been sick too, and there was no one else to do it. And she had looked up from the patient notes she was reviewing and said thank you, and I had stayed for an hour and talked about nothing in particular, and I had not wanted to leave. I told her about the seventh year, when the Keith succession dispute had kept me in council for 9 consecutive days, and she had put a cup of hot broth on my desk every morning without being asked, and I had understood by the fourth day that the broth was not the point. The point was that she had seen that I was running on nothing, and had done the quiet, practical, uncelebrated thing about it, and I had not thanked her properly. I told her about the night the betrothal was announced. I told her about the look on her face that I had told myself I misread. I told her that I had not misread it, and that I had looked away because I did not have the courage to look at what it meant. She listened. She did not interrupt me. When I was finished, she was quiet for what felt like a long time. "Those are moments," she said. "Yes. You've spent 9 years having moments," she said, "and in none of them did you." I said, "I didn't, because I'm a fool who calls a river comfortable water and never looks at where it's going." I paused. "Saren, I didn't understand what I was feeling because I had decided you were simply there. And I was afraid, I know this sounds like an excuse, and I'm not offering it as one, I was afraid that looking at it directly would change things, and things with you were good. The keep was good. You were good. And I didn't want to risk the good by naming what it actually was. So I chose the easier version of it, and I called that version enough." "And now you've been forced," she said. "The seal broke, yes. But what was under the seal?" I looked at her. "Saren, what was under the seal didn't appear in that hall tonight. It had been there for 9 years. The seal kept it from speaking in the way a bond speaks, but it didn't put it there. It was already there. I was simply determined not to look at it." She was quiet again. The mist moved. The mark on my wrist ached with a warmth that had nothing to do with temperature. "I was going to leave," she said. "When the betrothal was announced, I packed this bag the night of the announcement, and then she stopped. I told myself I was being irrational, that you were my employer and the keep needed me and I was being self-indulgent, so I unpacked it." "When did you pack it again?" I asked. "This afternoon," she said. "Before the rite." Before the rite. She had decided to leave before the ceremony even began. She had already made her peace with a life elsewhere, with the valley physician, with the southern holds. She had already turned her face toward a different future. And then the hall had gone to its knees. "You're still holding the bag," I said. She looked down at the small leather bag at her feet. She had not put it down when I arrived. She had not put it down during the entire conversation. "I know," she said. "I'm not going to tell you to put it down," I said. "You can take it to the valley holds if you decide that's what you want. I'm not your king in this. You're not my subject in this. This is," I looked at the mark on my wrist and at the one on hers, mirrored in the dark. "This is something else, and you get to choose what to do with it. You're asking me to stay." "I'm asking you to consider it," I said. "Not as a practical solution. Not as the woman who keeps the archive and briefs me on the dispatches and makes the keep run. As the woman I should have seen 9 years ago and didn't, and who deserves to be told plainly that I see her now. The stable yard, the mist, a dog somewhere in the lower ward barking at nothing." "I need to think," she said. "Yes," I said. She stopped. "I don't want to think in the keep. Everyone will be watching. You know what it will be like." "I know." "Give me tonight," she said. "Not the valley, just tonight. I'll walk to the lower gate and back and I'll think and you'll leave me alone." "Yes," I said. She stood. She picked up the bag. She looked at me for a moment with that level gaze I had known for 9 years, the one that neither challenged nor deferred but simply met, and then she walked toward the lower gate. I went inside. I did not sleep. I went to my study and I sat at my desk and I looked at the work that was waiting there, the border reports, the trade adjustments that needed signing, the fallout from the solvent situation that was already beginning to require correspondence, and I did not touch any of it. I sat in the chair that I sat in every morning when Saren stood at the other side of the desk and told me what I needed to know, and I thought about 9 years. I thought about what it means to mistake steadiness for smallness. Saren had never made herself small. She had been precisely herself, every day, without performance or apology. But I had filed her under reliable, and then under essential, and then under mine in the sense that the keep is mine, and I had never made myself ask what that filing was costing her. She had cost herself years of waiting on a man who was looking past her, and I had accepted that cost on her behalf without ever being aware enough to refuse it. A keeper of records, I thought. All those years of keeping my records, and I had never once opened the right one. I was still at the desk when the gray began to come into the sky. I heard the keep starting to wake, the early guard change, the kitchen fires, the particular creak of the gallery that meant someone was walking the eastern side. And then I heard something closer, a door in the passage outside my study. I got up. Saren was in the corridor. She still had the bag. She also had her coat on and her boots, and her hair was down from the travel knot she had put it in earlier and was hanging loose against her collar, which happened sometimes on mornings after she had worked very late. She looked tired and steady and like herself. She looked at me. I had been sitting at my desk without a lamp for the better part of an hour, and I was certain I looked far worse. "The archive door is sticking again," she said. "The hinge on the left. You'll need someone to look at it." I stood very still. "I noticed it last week," she said. "I should have put in a repair order. I'll send it this morning." I looked at her, at the bag in her hand, at her face, which was composed and tired and giving me everything I needed to read it if I chose to. "The morning dispatch is ready," she said. 3 things that can't wait. The North Patrol roster is short by 2 for the coming month, and you'll need to decide if you're pulling from the inner guard or requesting from the keyed secondary. The Valley Trade Envoy arrives in 11 days, and your last response to him was ambiguous enough that he's likely to arrive with the wrong expectations. And Lord Keed sent a private rider last night, which I haven't opened, but the seal was not his usual correspondence seal, which suggests it's from his son rather than Keed himself, which changes the diplomatic weight of whatever it contains. I said, "Saren." She stopped. "Are you staying?" I said. She set the bag down, not dramatically. Simply put it on the floor of the corridor, the way she would put a ledger on a shelf when she was done with it, decisively, without fuss. "There's no one else who knows where Holt's original land deed copies are filed," she said. "The keep would fall apart in a month." "Is that why?" I said. She was quiet for a beat, then she said very quietly, "No." I crossed the corridor. Not quickly. She would not have wanted quickly. Quick felt like the wrong word for what had taken 9 years to arrive at. I crossed the corridor at the pace of a man who has, finally, somewhere to be going, and I stopped in front of her and I looked at her the way I had not let myself look for the better part of a decade. She was exactly as she had always been, the ink on her fingers, the steady brown eyes, the small, fine lines at their corners that had not been there in the first year, the particular set of her chin that meant she had made up her mind about something, and the making up had not been easy. "I see you," I said. "I know it's late. I know you have every reason to pick that bag back up and I won't stop you if you do. But I see you, Saren. I have been standing in the middle of something real for 9 years and calling it ordinary, and I am finished calling it ordinary." She was quiet. She was thinking, that rapid, Thorough, internal accounting I had watched her do in councils and over dispatch reports, and late at night over the archive ledgers. She was running the same calculation she ran on everything. The weight of the thing against the cost of it, the risk against the value, the what it is against the what it claimed to be. Then she said, "You're going to have to work for it." I breathed, yes. I don't mean, she shook her head slightly. I don't mean I'm going to make it difficult out of spite. I mean I've spent a long time being easy for you to overlook, and I'm not going to be easy anymore. I'll tell you when I'm unhappy. I'll tell you when you're wrong. I'll disagree with you in councils if I think you're wrong, the same as I always have. And you won't be able to dismiss it the way you used to, because you'll know what it means. Good, I said. And the solvent situation? I'll manage it. Is going to require genuine diplomacy and not just an apology. Myra deserves. Myra knows, I said. She felt it break. She told me herself that the working knew. I will write to the Solven Lord, and I will write to her directly, and it will be handled with every care she deserves. She is not the villain of this, and I will not let her be treated as one. Saren looked at me for a moment. All right, she said. It was not a declaration. It was not a ceremony or a vow or a moment in a great hall with a pack bowing. It was two people standing in a corridor in the gray early morning, tired and a little undone, and looking at each other with the clear eyes that come after something has been settled. It was entirely private. It was entirely hers, which is to say it was exactly what she would have chosen. I told you I am a man who remembers. So I will tell you what I remember of the rest of that autumn, and the winter that followed it. I remember that the first council session after the ceremony was strained in the way that important things, once known, make other things strained. Lord Keed watched me and watched Saren, and the watching was not hostile. Keed was many things, but he was not stupid, and the mark on both wrists was not something you could misread. But he said, carefully, at the session's end, that he assumed certain assurances regarding the Southern Keep's land agreements would remain in place. Saren said before I could, "They will." I drafted those agreements, and I know them better than the original signatories did. You have nothing to worry about on that count. And then she gave him a look that was entirely pleasant and entirely non-negotiable, and Lord Keed, who had been trying to manage her quietly for the better part of 9 years, seemed to make a decision. Very good, he said, and he didn't try to manage her after that. I remember that the Solven correspondence took 3 weeks to fully resolve. The Lord was angry for 2 of those weeks and had a right to be. The 3rd week he was businesslike, which was better. Myra wrote to me directly, a short letter, and the letter said, "I hope she was worth the trouble. I suspect she is." I kept that letter. It was generous of her, and I did not take it for granted. I remember the morning of the first snow of winter, when I came down to the study earlier than usual and found Saren already at the long table with the border survey maps, cross-legged and in her informal clothes, working on something that had nothing to do with the morning dispatch. She looked up when I came in and said good morning and looked back at the maps. I went to my desk and sat and worked, and we were in the same room without speaking for the better part of an hour, and it was exactly as it had always been and entirely different. I remember that she told me I was wrong twice that week, once about the North Patrol assessment and once about a trade figure I had misread, and both times she was right, and both times I said so without qualification. She accepted this with the same equanimity with which she accepted everything, which is to say, she nodded and moved on. I remember the evening in deep winter when I asked her to stay at the desk after the day's work was done, and I sat across from her and I said, "Tell me what I missed, the things you didn't say in 9 years." And she looked at me for a long moment, and then she said, "That would take a while." And I said, "I have time." And she told me. Some of it was practical, things she had wanted to do differently in the keep, approaches she had thought of and not put forward because she hadn't been sure of her standing. Some of it was personal and harder. She told me about the 4th year, when she had made her own decision about what her situation was and what it wasn't, and had told herself that she would leave when the right thing came along, and then had found that the right thing kept not coming because, as she said, with her customary precision, she had set an unfairly high standard, and the standard had kept looking exactly like what she already had. She told me about the night of the betrothal announcement and what she had felt, and I listened to all of it. Some of it was difficult to hear. I let it be difficult. "You're not angry," I said at one point. "You should be, and you're not." "I'm not angry," she said. "I'm angry in the way you're angry at a river for going where rivers go. You didn't know. The seal made sure you didn't know, and even without the seal, she looked at the mark on her wrist. You were always going to be slow about this. I knew that about you in the first year. I accommodated it." She paused. "I'm not sure I should have accommodated it quite so much." "No," I said, "you shouldn't have." "I know," she said, and then more quietly, "I won't anymore." She didn't. She was better at it than I was in the early months, better at saying the difficult thing, and then letting it stand without softening it, better at being exactly as much and as little as the situation required. She had learned, over 9 years of being underestimated, a kind of economy with herself that was at once her greatest competence and the saddest thing about her. It took the better part of that winter for her to believe that the economy was no longer necessary, that she could take up space, that there was room. I worked at it. I had told her I would work for it, and I meant it, and the work turned out to be less about grand declarations and more about the small, consistent daily thing, noticing and saying so, asking and then waiting for the real answer, staying in the room. Spring came early that year. The mist cleared from the stone valleys in the second month, and the border meadows went from gray to green faster than I had seen in a decade, and something in the keep shifted with it, a lightening, a settling, the sense of a thing having found its correct form. The pack knew. Of course the pack knew. The marks were visible to anyone who looked, and veteran wolves are not given to pretending they can't see what they can see. The guards had accepted it first, the way soldiers tend to accept practical realities quickly. The council had accepted it in the way of people who are pragmatic about accomplished facts. Lord Keed had, as I said, made his decision. The others followed when Keed made no further objection. The pack acknowledged her, in the way a pack acknowledges a Luna, not through ceremony but through the small, consistent choices. The guard who held the archive door, the cook who sent the morning broth before I asked. The way the wolves in the lower ward watched her cross the yard, not as they watched any member of the household, but with the particular attentiveness that is a pack's way of saying, "She is one of ours." She did not make much of it. She thanked people when they did things, and she did not treat it as her due, which was exactly right and exactly her. I watched her cross the yard one morning in that early spring, making her way from the healer's room to the archive, a stack of reports under her arm and the usual ink on her fingers. And I thought about the girl who had arrived 9 autumns before with a solution to a filing problem, and no politics and no rank and no idea she would stay. I thought about the keep she had made quietly better in 100 ways that would have taken a visitor weeks to catalog. I thought about the bag on the corridor floor. I thought about what it had cost her and what she had given back anyway. I called her name across the yard. She stopped and looked over her shoulder. "The Water Rights Dispatch," I said. "Keed's son sent new figures. I need your read on them before the afternoon session." She considered this. "I'll need to see the original agreement from the 3rd year first." "I know where it's filed," I said. She raised an eyebrow. "Do you?" "3rd cabinet," I said. "Left side, behind the Haven border records." She looked at me for a long moment. Then something that was not quite a smile, but was its close neighbor, arrived at the corners of her mouth, and she turned back toward the archive. "Don't move anything before I get there," she said. "I know better," I said. She made a sound that I had learned, in the good months, to identify as agreement expressed with wry restraint. I am not a man given to ceremony. I told her so when we discussed the formal bond recognition, the public acknowledgement that the mark had been received and accepted by both parties. Custom has particular forms for it, particular language, a particular moment in the assembly of the pack. I asked if she wanted any of it. She thought about it. She thought about it with the thoroughness she gave to everything, and then she said, "Not the ceremony. I don't want to be stood up in the hall while people look at me. I've spent 9 years in this keep. Everyone who needs to know knows." "The formal record," I said, "for the archive." She gave me a look. "I'll write it myself," she said. "I write everything else." She did write it herself. I know because I have read it, a single entry in the bond record ledger in her small, neat hand, precise and unadorned, giving the date and the circumstances and the parties, and in the space where the right keeper usually writes the confirmation, the phrase recognized without ceremony, accepted without condition, and then her signature and mine below it, which she left space for. I signed it in the study on a February morning while she was filing the Winter Dispatch records on the other side of the room. I did not make an announcement. She looked over when she heard the scratch of the pen, and she said nothing and went back to the records. But I noticed that she filed the ledger when she was done in the first cabinet, left side, front, the place she kept the documents she returned to most often, the ones that needed to be to hand. That mattered to her. That was her version of the ceremony. She was at my desk that evening, working on the spring trade proposals, the lamp warm beside her, the ink on her fingers, the particular quality of silence she carried with her that was never empty. I sat in the chair across from her, and I worked on the patrol assessments, and we did not speak for the better part of an hour. Somewhere in the winter, I had stopped marking the difference between the Saren of before and the Saren of now, because there was no real difference. She had always been this. I had been the thing that was different, and then I had stopped being different, and she had extended the considerable grace of letting me catch up without making it the defining story of us. She looked up from the trade proposals. "The Eastern Envoy's figures are wrong," she said. "He's given us a price per bale that assumes the old road rates, but the Northern Pass toll went up in autumn. He's either made an error or he's testing us." "Testing us," I said. "Yes," she said. "I thought so too." She made a note. "I'll draft a response that is polite and makes it impossible for him to pretend the discrepancy is accidental." "You enjoy that," I said. She considered this with the seriousness she gave to honest questions. "A little," she said. "Yes." Outside, the last of the winter had not entirely given up, and there was sleet on the high windows, and the fire was going in the study hearth, and the keep around us was making its ordinary sounds. The guard change in the east yard. The kitchen below, closing down for the evening. Somewhere in the lower ward, a wolf howling briefly at nothing and then stopping. The lamp between us, warm on the work we were both doing. The ink on her fingers, the pen moving, small and certain, making the record of the thing. I thought, I very nearly lost this. I very nearly let her walk through a gate and into a different life, and the fact of that, the specific, clear-edged fact of how close it had come, was not something I would make the mistake of filing under comfortable again. She did not look up from the trade proposals, but she said without looking up, "You're staring." "I know," I said. "I can feel you doing it." "You're going to have to get used to that," I said. She looked up. The not-quite smile was there at the corners of her mouth. "I suppose I will," she said. She looked back at the trade proposals. The pen moved. The fire went on. Ink on her fingers, at my desk, in the warm late evening of a Vetheran winter. As if she had always belonged there. Because she had.